So I'm very pleased to have you all here back after the coffee break, and hopefully you still have a cup in your hands to be strengthened for this second session. In case anyone was under the impression that our project was largely data-based, well, no. We're now moving on to the second phase, more or less, of our project, which largely looked at institutions, and which largely had the case studies of the second part of the project based on different types of institutions. I will ask Megan, our main co-writer, to give a brief overview of, on the one hand, the challenges that we have found in the 6 countries that we studied, and some of our findings as concerned training in both language training and vocational training. We've looked at those issues. And then we will go on to move into particular sort of institutional specificities and institutional strength to some extent, and innovations in different contexts from different countries. And I'll end it here and immediately pass the floor to Megan, please. Thank you.
So first of all, I'd like to apologise to the panellists and also the room for instituting a fairly authoritarian no PowerPoint rule from now onwards. So if you, like me, were sort of gazing at the slides and thinking you didn't have to listen, you now have to listen. So I'm just going to start by talking about some of the key challenges that policymakers face in designing training programs that overcome some of the challenges that we were discussing in the last session, and then look at some of the most innovative ways of overcoming these challenges, and finally just outline some of our main recommendations in the report just on the area of training. First of all, I'd like to start with 2 caveats. Obviously, the skills needs of new arrivals are highly diverse. They range from, on the one hand, people who lack basic skills, language, literacy, numeracy, to those who are functionally able to perform a job, but don't fulfill the regulatory requirements in their country of residence. The second related caveat, of course, is that these skills needs manifest themselves in entirely different ways across the countries in our study. So vocational qualifications are extremely important in Germany, as you all know. Very few jobs can be performed without qualifications. And then at the other side of the spectrum, places like the Czech Republic, the UK, to some extent France, where vocational qualifications aren't that prestigious, and they're certainly not seen as the ticket to middle-skilled work. So moving on now to the challenges. The first challenge is access. Many training programs we've found require a certain level of language proficiency. Others may not recognize immigrants' foreign qualifications gained elsewhere, even their secondary school education, as making them entitled to participate in the program. And these barriers, they obviously block people out of certain training programs, but they also cause a very different problem, which is that they can require people to essentially have to start from the beginning. So first work on strengthening their language proficiency, then move on to gaining the equivalent of, say, secondary school education, and only then moving on to the higher vocational qualifications that might prepare them for middle-skilled work. And of course, as you all know, this time spent at the labour market makes it likely that their existing skills go out of date. It's a waste of previous education that they've already invested in. And it's also time spent out of the labour market that could be spent acquiring host country work experience, which, as we all know, is one of the main indicators of success. So what might be thought ideal is instead for people to be in work, being able to develop their skills from within work. And in fact, employer-sponsored training, it's often described as this kind of Holy Grail, this thing that everyone wants to crack. But evidence from several of the studies that we looked at suggested that employers are less likely to invest in immigrant workers. Immigrants are also more likely to be working in temporary employment and more likely to be working for small businesses. All of these are indicators of being less likely to be able to access training. Another common problem that we found is that for people who were enrolled in training while unemployed, this entitlement might stop once they get a job. And for someone who moves into a low-skilled job, this essentially means that they then move to having to finance the training themselves. And so it's quite likely that they will end up dropping out of programs. And this can happen with language training, so people dropping out of language training once moving into low-skilled work. Second challenge is closely related. This is about training programs not being very well adapted to the needs of low-skilled workers. So training programs might not be designed for language learners, they might be paced a little too fast, or they might assume knowledge based on the traditional school system in the country. The second element of this challenge is that training programs are often provided for people who've been through the traditional school system, who have followed traditional trajectories. Not for adult learners necessarily, and in particular not for people who need to fill small skills gaps in their education, rather than starting their training from the first point. So there are several ways that policymakers have tried to overcome these challenges. The first main way is through bridging programs or complementary programs. These try and overcome specific skills gaps, again, rather than requiring people to retrain, minimizing the amount of time spent out of the labor market. So one example that we came across was the Swedish For Professionals program in Stockholm, which offers intensive programs of work-specific vocabulary, information about regulatory systems, practical information about the particular professions, in jobs like drivers, truck drivers, bus drivers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, engineers. And these programs are thought to be successful because they're designed as coherent packages. And I spoke to a number of students who said, this is the first time we have been highly motivated to participate in training programs because we can see the goal. We know that this is a job that's in demand in the local labour market, and the program was very intensive. But there are also similar sort of parallel track programs for workers with the basic skills needs that we were talking about as a major challenge in the last session. And these are much less common in Europe, much more common in the US. So for occupations such as healthcare assistants, classroom assistants, the sort of very basic domestic care workers, and these address basic skills in parallel with vocational skills. And some of the key ingredients of success in these programs are that they have a vocational teacher in a classroom alongside a language assistant who's there at all points to sort of explain the concepts to people who are finding it difficult to keep up. The third final group of innovations that I just wanted to pull out are subsidized work experience programs. We talked about this a little in the last session. The rationale here is that they overcome the kind of chicken and egg problem that employers don't want to employ somebody without host country work experience. They don't want to take the gamble. And a number of studies have suggested that these are among the most effective interventions, particularly for disadvantaged groups. And there are some innovative variations of the subsidized work experience model. Again, many of these come from Sweden. So one, for example, I see Tommy's just nodding. So one, for example, requires employers, if they decide not to hire somebody that they've had as a work experience person, that they still have to provide them with a skills record that then goes to future employers and theoretically is something that's going to be more valued than anything produced by a public agency because it comes from another employer. Another innovation is requiring employers to provide language training, for instance, as a kind of condition of getting this subsidy. So just finally, to move on to our main recommendations. And as I say, these are just on training. We have other recommendations that I'd point you to in the report. The first is, of course, on improving employer incentives. So ensuring that training subsidies can be used to fund language training, for example. And then providing technical support or guidance for employers who are pretty inclined to invest in their immigrant workers, just can't really, just need a bit of support getting over some of their hurdles. Then ensuring that hiring trainees, apprentices, doesn't create additional costs such as extra insurance. And then our second recommendation is about moving away from linear, sequential approaches to training. So these are the ones that require immigrants to learn a language and only then are able to access adult education. And this is partly about making language more work-focused, emphasizing vocational elements, possibly thinking about digital skills at the same time as language courses. Thirdly, working with regulatory and training bodies to create better systems for mapping skills. So working out what the best training options are for workers is clearly such a critical piece of this puzzle. Equally, more modular instruction, particularly in regulatory professions. So again, just to plug this again, so that newcomers don't have to start from the beginning, but can fill specific gaps. And then finally, distance learning tools. Online learning, mobile phone apps, can both reduce the cost of expensive instruction, but also enable those who are in low-skilled work to access training in their own time, including during transport, which we found is quite an effective way of people being able to access learning on the go, particularly those who have childcare responsibilities combined with several low-skilled jobs. So just to sum up, I think our main takeaway from the report: overall, training systems aren't very well set up to address the needs of newly arrived immigrants. And for some people, particularly those with low basic skills, those trained in a middle school occupation who need to update their qualifications for a very different labour market, the most promising approaches that we came across are these very intensive ones, the ones that are designed as a coherent package and that develop several streams of skills in parallel. But for all the others, employer engagement is the absolute critical piece of the labour market integration puzzle, especially if we move to thinking about labour market integration as much about progression as it is about employment, which is, of course, the topic of our discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Megan. And I think you probably there already got a little bit of an insight how complex this whole issue is. And I'd like to add another issue of complexity, which is perhaps worth mentioning in this context of engaging employers in particular and complexity issues. Training system as such are very complex already. And here we're speaking about newcomers coming into those training systems, and how can one set up linkages between different institutions, and how do you get actors to work together? In a topic also, if you're looking at training, we earlier spoke already about the importance of recognition of qualifications, which is adding on to the complexity. Is there, even if you recognize and even if you have taken extra training and so forth, is there sufficiently signaling effect for the employers? And I think I'd like to pass the floor here to Gesine Kessler-Mohr, who is a representative from a German way of dealing with some of the complexity of the issue of training, recognition, and bringing different actors together. And I would like to invite you, Gesine, to speak to us on the issue of the IQ network, or program as it's called now in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. My name is Gesine Kessler-Mohr, and I'm working for the Hamburg Chamber of Crafts. For those who are not so familiar, who don't know the German system very much, we have two big chambers in Germany, the Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber of Crafts. And we are promoting the interests of more than 15,000 craft companies in Hamburg. And in all big cities in Germany, you have like the same structure. This is just very briefly. So I don't represent any scientific point of view. I represent more like an economic or practical point of view, what we do, in particular with our employers and with our enterprises. So this was a very good link. Thank you. I'm in charge for the Department of Integration at the Chamber of Crafts. I think the Chamber of Crafts in Hamburg is the only chamber in Germany who has such a department. So, as you can see, it's a new topic in Germany. We are talking about the last decade. We are dealing very strongly with the theme of integration. Just in 2005, the Immigration Act enters into force, so it's not even 10 years ago. Just in 2006, we had the first integration summit in Germany. In 2012, I mean, it's just 2 years ago, the National Action Plan on Integration came into force. And also in 2012, we had a new Recognition Act, which was introduced. So as you can see, we talk about a very short period of actions. The government took this topic on the agenda because the whole population is changing quite a lot in Germany, as in all the other European countries. And up to 20% of our population are already migrants or immigrants. And this trend is rising, especially in the big centers as Frankfurt, Munich, Hamburg, Cologne, Berlin. So all the big cities and metropole areas are facing these changes. And at the same time, as it has been mentioned earlier, the unemployment rate of immigrants are compared to many other European countries low, but they are always about twice as high as for nationals or non-immigrants. So we are talking about almost 9% unemployment rate for immigrants, and for the non-immigrants it's up to 4.7. So there is a big gap which has always been there and which is changing just very, very slowly. So what do I present here today? In my position at managing the department, our chamber has taken over the coordination of the IQ network. IQ is written out Integration Through Qualification, and this is a big funding program by the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in Germany, and this came into force with the Integration Act in 2005. And this is already probably one success point. It's jointly run with the Federal Ministry of Education and Research and also with the Federal Employment Agency. Because one of our main problems in Germany is, I think we have too many activities. we have too many activities at very different levels, at the federal level, at the federal state level, at the local level, and it's very hard to get an overview about all these different activities, and they're sometimes not very much coordinated, which makes it for the immigrants even more difficult to get through the jungle, we always say. So the Federal Ministry of Labor has implemented this IQ network, and in all Germany federal states, we have 16, there's a regional network running. And I'm presenting now one of these 16 networks, and I'm presenting the Hamburg network. And all of these 16 networks have three major points to deal with, or aims. First, we provide information and counseling on the recognition of foreign qualifications. Because of the new Recognition Act from 2012, we built up a totally new counseling structure in whole Germany. And we want to improve the intercultural skills of labor market players. This was also mentioned by Megan. So we try to train labor market actors as enterprises, as employer service agencies, so all the different actors who have an impact on integration. And we create regional networks of relevant stakeholders. As I said, in Germany we have, from my point of view, too many activities, so we need to coordinate them better and to find out the best way for this immigrant. So I think I was invited to speak about Hamburg because I think we do a good job in Hamburg. So, and I want to present you shortly the key features for our success from my point of view. In Hamburg, we have a network together with 8 different partner institutions, and they are all running sub-projects. And the Chamber of Crafts is coordinating all these different activities. And all these partners together have arranged the activities, and I want to point out 6 key issues for the success, and I think actually it relates very much, Megan, to your recommendations you made. The first is we have built a professional counseling and cooperation. So we cooperate with all the different actors in the labor market, and we have, for instance, invented and also got running a 1-week technical and vocational skills training in different industrial sectors, as for example healthcare, electricity, metalwork, environment and energy. And we are targeting with that, for example, unemployed immigrants or also refugees. And it's a very easy access for them without formal qualifications to train their skills. And after this 1 week, they get a big book from us where it's all written down what they can do, what kind of qualifications they have. And with that book, it's much easier for the employment service offices and also for us to find the right way and the best way for this one immigrant. So we look, does he need a language training? Does he need a vocational training? Or does he just need contact with the enterprise to get into the companies? Then we provide, as one of the first, I think, in whole Germany, we provide a professional training of the Recognition Act. So we got a lot of people who apply now to recognize their foreign qualification, especially in the health sector, which is very good because we have a lack of workforce there. But not all of them get like the full recognition. So there is this gap, I think Thomas has spoken about before. There is a gap, and we have to close these gaps. So we have to provide extra trainings for them to fill the gap and then to get the full recognition. And this is totally new because we can't combine big classrooms. I mean, every person has a different leg, so we have to invent very individual training courses. And we have tried in 3 sectors: in the health sector for nurses, in the craft sectors, these are all the different vocational training certificates. You maybe know we have a special system in Germany with a dual system, and for foreign engineers. And what is very specific about these trainings or why they are successful, I think we take a strong focus on the work-focused language course. So this is just what Megan says. In our classroom, we have the technical instructors plus the German teacher. So we call it team teaching. So they have to deal together, which is very hard for the technical instructors because they do their teaching what they always have done, and now the German teacher is coming and telling them, hey, there are some participants who don't have German as their mother language, so you have to change your whole system of teaching. And of course, he doesn't like it or she doesn't like it to do. So there is a lot of training necessary, but this is one of our key factors. Then we provide coaching and counseling, and also counseling of the enterprises. So for instance, if you do a training to get the full recognition of the nurse, we take the people into enterprises, into hospitals or other enterprises in the health sector, and they do a vocational training there. And through all these factors, we get them into a job. And this is also what Megan pointed out. People have a clear goal, and they know when they go through these trainings and when they go to this hard time, then they have a goal because they can get a job. And most of these people who have gone through these trainings have got their jobs right at after the vocational training phase. So this, I think, is one successful story. And then we have also especially in the craft sectors. We have professional trainings for the certificates of apprenticeship. So if you have like experience, you can get a certificate of apprenticeship by legal closings. In German, we call it Externenprüfung, which is very much regulated. So it's very difficult for outsiders to get into these systems. But we have tried it out in different professions: hairdresser, metal worker, bakery salesperson, industrial cleaning persons. And it's the same. We combine it with the employers. We combine it with the workforce language course. 2 minutes, yeah, I will come to the end. And that makes it very successful as well. And another activity we are gaining for as the IQ Network Hamburg is the diversity competence training. And we especially train our employment agencies for the first time. And we train them not for one time, we train them now for a period of 3, 4, 5 years. So it gets into a real like structural process in the employment agency, as well as in our own chamber. Here, for instance, the IQ Network has done some pilot trainings, and now my boss has implemented the trainings into our normal training programs, and it's also financed now by the chamber. So it has, the challenge was to implement it into the mainstreaming activities, and we were successful with that. And the last one, what we do a lot of cooperation, events, and PR activities. This has been not mentioned today. In Germany, it's very important to do a good public relation. So we do PR activities in the public transport of Hamburg. We face the opportunities of the Recognition Act. We face problems with discrimination, and we try to also discuss it with the public. And the last one, we also have addressed a job fair, addressing just immigrants and employers. And this is also a fair model which was very successful, and it is now financed by the Federal Employment Agency, and it's gone to all Germany. So it's a special fair where we just invited immigrants to come and their employers. So these are some practical examples for the success, and I think many of them are linked to the scientific challenges you have mentioned. Okay, I got some more, but I come to the end now, and I will put it to the discussion later. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Gesine. I'll quickly abuse of my chair position here and make the remark that what strikes me in this is that it's a very individualized process, and one can say perhaps that is a reflection of how desperate Germany meanwhile is to have to attract skills at different levels, to be able to really mobilize absolutely everyone who's there, and in a very individualized fashion, and to get the most out of the existing human resources and strengthen them. And we can perhaps in our discussion later see whether you consider that that is a model for other countries which may not have the same type of labor market situation at this point in time. But I would now like to pass the floor to our next speaker, Johan Niederlander, who will give us the perspective of the Swedish Public Employment Service and what they are up to in terms of innovation in the area we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Johan Niederlander, and I come from the Public Employment Service in Sweden. Because of the 10-minute limit, I will save the PES from now on. First off, I would like to express my gratitude to be able to come here today and talk to you all about how Sweden works with the first early 2 years of the integration process for refugees. In this short presentation, I will describe the different tools that the PES and other actors use in the integration process. I will also talk about some of the challenges we see and how we try to tackle them. But before I go into that, I think it's necessary for me to very briefly describe the Introduction Act for Refugees. The PES is, since 2010, responsible for integrating newly arrived refugees in Sweden. With this reform, a unified set of rules regulating the integration process was created nationally. After a residence permit has been granted, the PES meets the individual as soon as possible and plans the coming 2-year period. The goal of this so-called introduction plan is to move towards employment or higher studies during this 2-year period. The educational and vocational background varies a lot within the target group when it comes to refugees, and so does the needs for activities and support. It is of central importance that the PES and the other actors involved in providing activities manage to meet these different needs, because they are not the same. The Public Employment Service has a number of tools at its disposal during this early part of the integration process. These activities can be both delivered by the PES or private actors working for us. One important activity is preparatory training courses. These programs is used early in the integration process and in many times is needed before the individual can participate in more job-near labor market programs. These courses entails mapping of vocational background, finding a suitable vocational area, and participating in job-oriented Swedish. When these courses are concluded, usually the individual can move on to more job-near labor market programs. One such example is vocational employment training. This is a shorter job-focused course that targets the current demands on the job market, for example within healthcare or logistics. These programs are usually provided by external parties from the relevant sectors. Another central tool is practice or internship. Together with the employers in Sweden, we provide different programs that give the job seeker initial work experience in Sweden. These programs provide an early contact with the job market and are an opportunity for the participants to have their competences evaluated professionally. Some forms of practice can also validate the participants' competences and give them a documented experience from a Swedish employer, which we already mentioned is important. Another important ingredient is various types of subsidized employment, such as step-in jobs, which we also mentioned shortly. These programs gives the employers an extra carrot to employ newly arrived immigrants and provide them with an early footing on the job market. In order for an employer to use this program, the individual must be able to study Swedish for immigrants parallel with working. This creates a positive combination of gaining work experience while learning Swedish, which we also talked about earlier today. Work practice and different forms of subsidized employment is often this group's first contact with the job market in Sweden. And it's highly important that the PES has a continued dialogue and cooperation with employers in Sweden on both local and national level. National Matching is an ESF project led by the PES that match competence with demand on the national labor market. The project's target group is immigrants with higher education who nevertheless have difficulties in finding works within their professions. The PES has identified a number of challenges in providing these programs, but also have tried ways to tackle them. One has been that employers and providers of job-focused activities tend to want to wait before the individuals is deemed proficient in Swedish. This is a problem because it halts the integration process in a way that we do not think is necessary. To handle this problem, a couple of methods has been developed and tested. One example is the introduction of on-the-job practice with tutor benefits to the employer. This program grants financial benefits to employers that provide extra tutoring to the individual at the workplace. This can reduce the time it takes before the job seeker can get work experience. The tutor will, after the activity is completed, provide a document covering what work practice has entailed and the individual's performance. This document is useful for further planning of activities for the PES and job seeking for the individual. Another way to reduce this gap is the customer resource service officers. By hiring individuals with the same linguistic and cultural background as the new arrival and who are established themselves on the labor market in Sweden, this new role has been created. The customer resource works with finding opportunities on the job market locally and support the job seeker and the employer at the workplace during the initial period of the practice. In this way, the perceived barriers, both from the job seekers and the employer's standpoint, can be eliminated early. The PES would like to see this program to be permanently established as a labor market program within the legal framework in the future. The PES is furthermore developing the methods for working structurally and at the same time catering to different needs of support. A new model for how caseworkers can plan the 2-year period in the Introduction Act to create the best chain of activities is right now being developed. This model is designed to tackle several challenges that we see in the participation and in the progress, including the difference in both results and participation when it comes to men and women. This model will be tested in 10 pilot offices in Sweden during the spring and early summer next year. And from the acquired knowledge, we hope to develop the way we work with newly arriveds all over the country. Another very important ingredient is individual and flexible Swedish studies, which we also shortly have mentioned. The municipalities in Sweden provide Swedish for Immigrants to the participants of the Introduction Act. Experience has shown that the best progress is made when the individual can practice language acquired in a school setting at the workplace. These activities must therefore run parallel to each other for the best result, which we also have discussed. Some municipalities have provided excellent systems of Swedish studies that are both individual and job-focused. For example, the SFX of Swedish For Professionals that Megan mentioned is very important. The PES would like to see this type of Swedish for Immigrant programs to be used more widely and more frequently in Sweden. We have also seen that these programs has been easier to provide in areas with greater cities and not maybe in the countryside where you have a few people who need help instead of a lot, so then you can adapt. Cooperation, when it comes to Swedish for Immigrants, cooperation and joint planning with the municipality is a priority to find and develop best practices and good example. And this cooperation also has to happen on national and local level. Regardless if you're aiming for higher studies or establishing on the labor market, the educational system is a very important component. For a person with a short educational background, adult education could be a central tool to be able to compete on the Swedish labor market. A major challenge within the Introduction Act is to make adult education more accessible to the participants. One of the identified obstacles is that some schools require you to have finished your Swedish for Immigrants before you are accepted. The PES do not think that that should be necessary and that flexible solutions should be able to handle this. In addition to this, the PES themselves must become better in guiding the individual toward adult education. To strengthen the usage of the educational system, the PES has recently begun the opportunity to use the folk high schools for newly arrived refugees. These courses are targeted for newly arrived with low educational background and contain Swedish studies, activities preparing the individual and activities preparing the individual for the labor market. Newly arrived academics bring needed competence to Sweden, and it is essential that this resource is used. To give the opportunity for this group to complement their international education, the PES is buying a program called Shortcut. It is arranged through the universities in Sweden and contains coaching, mapping, education, and job-specific Swedish on an academic level. The PES and the educational system in Sweden still have a long way to go when it comes to guiding newly arrived toward studies and towards studies on the appropriate level. In the future, we see that Sweden has a shortage of people in the workforce. If the challenges in the integration process are tackled correctly, Sweden's generous system for protecting refugees is a great opportunity. With this very brief overview, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, and you will see me here very much at ease as an ILO person because this is a truly tripartite panel. We had an employer, a government representative, and now we will also pass the floor to my colleague Zuzana Muscat-Gorska from the International Trade Union Confederation, because the unions also are very active in the area of integration and have a lot to contribute, and we would like to learn a little bit from your activities also.
Hope it's on. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zuzana Muscat-Gorska. I work as policy advisor for International Trade Union Confederation. This is a global representation of the trade union movement, representing 178 million workers in 151 countries worldwide, so truly global. And I would like to take us perhaps through the more advocacy line, following up perhaps of some points Johan has mentioned. I want to focus on 6 issues. First, what are the costs of labor migration? How low-skilled migrants contribute to growth? Where is the rights gap? What trade unions do about it? Where is the link between unequal recognition of skills or access to treatment and addressing real labor market deficits through migration? And what are ingredients of successful skills matching training policies? And this will lead to basically 3 conclusions. That lack of proper, just recognition of skills and access to treatment for migrants, especially low-skilled migrants, originates in a non-respect for the equal treatment principle, that this unequal right constitutes comparative advantage against social justice principle, and that therefore responses must be more systemic, regulatory, and going beyond ad hoc approaches to skill matches by all the partners where we try to fill in for obvious deficiencies. It has to be more complex and concerned with rights. So first, a few points about the cost of labor migration. In the migration debate, also in the post-2015 framework, the costs of labor migrations are usually framed as financial costs, so remittances, like the benefits from remittances, or recruitment costs, yes or no, but it's growing recognition that costs of labor migrations are also human costs, meaning deprivation of rights. And in this context, skills mismatch and lack of equal access to training, it's like these barriers to upward mobility for low-skill, low-wage migrants are a deprivation of rights and cost of labor migration, which we see broadly as deprivation of right to development, so perpetuation of poverty over generations, antithesis of decent work, and antithesis of social justice. Just social justice principle says that there should be no economic comparative advantage on the expense of fundamental rights. And that leads us even to the so-called cost of coercion, meaning the business that is done on the forced labor victims. And on the other side, there is an issue, how do we see low-wage and low-skilled migrants and their contribution to the economy? Usually what we see is that the rights are respected for professional, highly skilled migrants and not for low-skilled or low-wage migrants, whereas at the same time we have clear data that these low-skilled, low-wage migrants actually constitute 80% of the global migration force. And they contribute almost at the same percentage to growth. So we see contributions are higher, but rights are systemically lower. And starting from the point that equal treatment is a right, these are ILO conventions, ILO migration conventions, this is the UN Migrant Workers Convention right, equal treatment, equal pay and rights for the work of equal value. It used to be also the principle of the EU law, at least for the EU migrants, meaning prohibition, EU treaty prohibition of discrimination based on nationality. And now, especially in the EU, but also broadly, we see scaling up and like the systemic use of various forms, excluding the equal treatment principle, and that obviously feeds into the rights to skill recognition as well as access to treatment. And we see this growing and systemic omission of the equal treatment of migrants through bilateral migration agreements, and especially in the EU context, through the use of constructions such as posting of workers, which actually allows for bringing agency workers also from third countries. And we all know very well that in case of posting of workers, any broadening of the rights of the fixed catalogue of minimum rights is seen as violation of the freedom to provide services. That includes union representation, meaning that, for instance, if any EU country would like to adopt a regulatory response to the equal, like the right to skills recognition for migrants, where if they are posted, as it goes beyond the fixed list of rights provided to posted workers, it can end in the European Court of Justice as an infringement of the freedom to provide services. And like what trade unions are doing about it, as I said, we see the skills match and access to treatment as broader issue that deals with right-based approaches to migration. And that means that we, of course, we have to involve in like ad hoc responses, organizing migrants, organizing irregular migrants. This includes the Mediterranean region that is very hot region right now. This includes union interventions, including, for instance, seafarers, Italian seafarers who try to rescue sinking migrants, exposing themselves to criminal sanctions, because in Italy it's actually criminalized to help people on the seas. It includes attempts to organize very difficult groups to organize, such as dispersed migrants from third countries, from Bangladesh, in Greece, from South Korea, in Czech Republic. Obviously, you know how the migration corridors change right now. Trade union responses also include organizing the migrant workers centers, trying to not only provide with support for claiming rights, but also navigating migrants through the labor market and trying to show the ways to upgrade skills and stay on the labor market. It includes working with companies, mediation, collective bargaining. Actually, Belgium, I think, is a good example. It was last year where there was a sectoral collective action asking for demanding equal treatment and equal pay and observing Belgian minimum wage in meatpacking and slaughtering sector, which is prone to to employing big amounts of migrants, and it was a successful action. So this also, like what the unions are trying to do is also to address infringements and crises such as direct compensation of these human costs and assistance to migrants. Actually, we did have cases from Sweden where we see that we see the problematic operation of the principle that migrants are brought to the Swedish labor market on the basis of a non-binding job offer, which systemically changes upon arrival and constitutes really deceptive recruitment. And then there is up to now, correct me if I'm wrong, but up to now it seems that there was no action taken against employers for deceptive recruitment and virtually trafficking, labor trafficking, forced labor, whereas in all examples of such abuses, these examples resulted in expulsion of migrants who were actually victims of this deception. But still, like in our perspective, this unequal recognition of skills or unequal access to training for migrants, it also constitutes a barrier for like a proper assessment of real labor market need, in a way that we see a business made out of simply bringing new waves of migrants to the labor market without proper assessment of the needs. Of course, the rationale for migrant recruitment are all this serious data about the workforce deficit we are heading to. Germany, the needs like 5 million workers needed in 10 years, or Japan loss of 40% of workforce in 25 years, and the obvious argument to fill in the gap. But at the same time, the stats do not explain how it is possible to see the workforce deficit together with the rise of unemployment of both migrants and the nationals and migrants already present on the labor market. We have the global data of the unemployment among the youth of 40%. So, and how it is possible to claim workforce deficit with job creation being flat, including in the EU. The skills mismatch is a broader issue. The ILO has just come up with the statistical report last month, saying that in Europe we have 25-45% of the job mismatch overall for all already present on the labor market. So I think that this leads me to the conclusions I already sort of indicated, that we need a correction of discourse on low-skilled migrants who are main contributors to growth and right holders. We need to get framework right on skills recognition and access to training through equal access for migrant workers. I think we back to all these arguments about the need for right-based approaches to migration, harmonization of employment and migration policies. Where is the social dialogue? Why even ministries of labor are not consulted on migration policies, not even talking to trade unions and employers? So there is a work to do there, and last but not least, organizing representation rights for migrant workers. How we can have a situation in which migrants are denied freedom of association, whereas trade unions are punished also financially for organizing the rights to organizing actions in protection of migrant workers' rights. So,
Thank you very much, Susanna. You have taken us out into some of very global underlying questions here. On the one hand, the issue of deregulation, and we had this issue talked by David Metcalf already this morning. Maybe deregulation can be used as an argument to bring people into work, but then there are longer time issues with that. You've also talked about how different forms of immigration can actually probably contribute to labor market segmentations and so forth. And it reminded me a little bit of the whole discussion, this difficult sort of difficulty that we have on the one hand to deal with how to organize mainstream activities versus more targeted integration activities. I think that's also something that came out of the different contributions here, very much coordination issues. And it really struck me that in the different contributions we had the issue of working structurally, meaning in some cases mainstreaming, creating policies which are for all workers as workers, or for all job seekers as job seekers, etc., and integrate newcomers into that, as well as at the same time, or maybe not at the same time, but because timing is another issue, but at the same time working also on more targeted policies. And this is also some of the findings that we have in our report, that these things are not easy, and that most countries operate both types of program at the same time. And yeah, timing, I think that became very, very clear here regarding when is the best moment to give what type of language training to new arrivals in particular. And then we have, but we can discuss that now, and I'd like to open the floor. Of course, all also more philosophical questions that already came up this morning to some extent, as how long is a migrant, and well, Georg Fischer raised the issue of counting them, but there's also the question of discourse around migrants and their integration, and whether our whole field of study, migration studies, has not also been linked much more with issues of ethnicity and so forth. But I'll stop it here, no longer abuse of my chair position, and open the floor. Laurent.
I think we heard, and also we were able to read in the country paper about Sweden that it has invested so much in terms of integrating migrants, especially about language training, that the local level is very much involved, and that the outcomes were to some extent disappointing. And so I was just wondering how authorities in Sweden evaluate this progress, and is it only through a labor market? Obviously from a public employment services, I guess it's mainly about return to employment or stability of employment, how the various aspects of integration are taken into account later on, because what you may have long-term benefits also about this kind of policy.
The Introduction Act has been in place for a fairly short period of time. So I think we can do more interesting evaluation over time as this system has been in play for a little bit longer of time. Right now the way we follow up the Introduction Act is we look at what the participants do after they left the Introduction Act after 2 years. And then we look at studies as well as different types of works. We haven't yet done any. We haven't looked if it's better now or before we got this assignment, but I know that Stockholm University is evaluating the process the reform on a bigger scale. If we look at how it looks today, then approximately 26-27% is either working or studying after this 2-year period, which is a result we're fairly happy with, but still we feel that it must go up in the future. In addition to this, I think it's it's appropriate to say that right now we have some structural challenges to the Introduction Act and our ability to perform it with good results. One big issue is the lack of housing in Sweden, which halts the integration process. And we also right now have a staff at the PES which has a high workload because the number of refugees needing help has almost doubled since we got this new assignment. And these challenges will probably affect the results in a negative way, I'm afraid.
Can I add a point about Swedish language training and the involvement of the local level, which is partly what your question was about? I think one of the involvement of municipalities is clearly a real strength in Sweden, but it's also been a little bit of a challenge, particularly for Swedish language, because it's entirely devolved. You have a situation where you have almost 300 municipalities who are responsible for Swedish language training, which doesn't always really facilitate innovation, because some municipalities just don't have enough engineers, for example, to provide a more targeted program. And in fact, historically, a lot of municipalities didn't even really group people by ability, so they were essentially having very mixed ability classrooms. And the SFX, the Swedish For Professionals program, which we both mentioned because it's so effective in its results, only came about by encouraging cooperation among all the municipalities in Stockholm. So I think that the devolution of Swedish language has led to some poor outcomes. There are a few evaluations that the Swedish author points to in his report, in our report No Quick Fix, that are quite negative, I think, on Swedish language learning at the local level.
Yes, I think you were, Madeline.
Thanks. I have a question for Gesine and Johan. I was wondering what your perspective is on this issue of how to help immigrants with very low levels of basic skills, so people who struggle with literacy and numeracy and so forth, and in particular whether you think that this is inherently an area where it's just going to be difficult to involve employers, that employers want to work with people once they already have a much higher level of proficiency, or whether there are ways to get employers involved at that early stage.
I think there are a lot of employers who are interested also in low-skilled workers. For instance, in the health sector in Germany, it is so that they have outsourced all the different services. So in former times, a nurse actually did everything. Now a nurse is really just dealing with a patient, and all the logistic services with the medicine and with food and everything are doing other people. And these are low-skilled people. And for instance, in cooperation with the hospitals, we have special training programs for people who don't have any skills, but who are interested in the job and who have like a communicative skill. And they are running a 6-month program, and then they can enter into the job. So these programs are existing, but we can just do them if the employers have a need. I mean, we don't do these programs without the employers. And I think that is possible, and it's also good in a way because it's the first step for them ever to enter the market, the labor market. And especially for this program, we have a lot of women who have never worked before and who don't even have a school, who didn't even graduate from school, so a very different group.
I agree with you on cooperation with the employers here, because that is central. When it's so much more of a challenge if experience or education is not documented in the formal way. But there's also ways to use the employers to validate competences that are not documented, and that could be an important ingredient, and we try to use that in our work. And I think to get the best results there, it's also appropriate to have some form of language support while doing it. So you can have all these 3 processes at the same time.
I think there was another question behind there, or comment. Oh yeah, David, yes.
Already, but I was wondering more about the current. Is it overridden? Were you talking to me or no?
Yes, please, please.
Yes. So my question was more generally about the current situation in terms of the evaluation of these programs, because I think the main aim of this discussion is really to understand which programs work the best for migrants, right? And I'm working for a migration policy group, and we've been looking for good quality evaluations, and actually we ended up understanding that there are not so many good quality evaluations, and so I was wondering if you could reflect on this current situation and what would be your suggestions in terms of improving this current situation.
David, was your question linked to?
It's completely linked, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really to the German and Swedish colleagues. I mean, what you went through sounds terrifically impressive. You know, we haven't got anything like that in the UK. I mean, there may be some sort of ad hoc work going on with charities. It sounds very, very impressive. And so, I mean, I've got two sort of interrelated questions. One is, do you have any information on how much this costs? Just basically the cost side of it. But I was going on to then say it's the same thing about the evaluation. I mean, how do you evaluate it? I mean, if Hamburg is sort of at the absolute forefront of this, are there some other cities, for example, that are really not very good, and you could make a comparison like that? Because, I mean, I'm inferring it's probably almost impossible to do random assignment, which is what you ideally want to do, but if you maybe could do it by local authorities. And I guess, you know, similar in Sweden, but I mean, I'd just be very interested in what the cost of these programs are.
Okay, yeah, the evaluation is a good point. I mean, the IQ program, the funding program from the federal government of Germany, has been evaluated from the beginning on, and it is an external, like, institution. And they are printing a report every year, and it's presented to the federal ministry. And then, of course, it's under discussion within the ministry and also with other social actors. So there is a kind of evaluation, and I think it's quite good, because really the ministry then looks into the evaluation and takes the best results out for the next funding period. And the funding, David, it's about 30 million euro a year for the whole program, so in all 16 federal states.
But how many people?
For how many? You mean like staff employed?
How much does it cost like that?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea, David. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know, but the problem is actually, and this makes it at one point terrific, but these are all pilot activities. Most of them are pilot activities, and we have the challenge to get them into the mainstream activities.
Or not. If the evaluation says that they're no good, you wouldn't want to put them in.
Of course, of course. But these are the costs, like 30 million euro a year for the whole structure in whole Germany. And this is like funding for the staff working in the project as well as the immigrants.
When it comes to Sweden, I'm afraid I do not have the costs on the top of my head, but right now the Introduction Act entails approximately 40,000 individuals. And most of the costs, or at least a good portion of the costs, were there before the Introduction Act, but paid out in another way. Oh, perfect.
The entire cost of the 2 years introduction program in Sweden is about 30,000 euros per person. Of that money, about half is money distributed from the government to the municipalities for refugee reception. The rest is about half is the introduction benefit for the individual, and the rest is the employment of this work with new arrivals. From the 30,000 euros to work in this program.
Sorry, my reaction to that is at 15,000 per person per year. It sounds very expensive, but it may well be very worthwhile. You know, in a sense, let's wait and see on the evaluations.
When it comes to the evaluation, we have some early ways of evaluating the Introduction Act in itself when we look at how many are in work or studies after participating. There are ways that we would like to develop the way we follow up the Introduction Act. For example, how does the results vary depending on what type of programs were used in this framework and such. So there's certainly a way it could be developed, which is the best way to go through this process to have the good chance to be established after it's concluded.
Yeah, David, I got some numbers. I had to look them up. So the IQ network has, for instance, counseled more than 32,000 people in the last 2 years about the Recognition Act. So this is like one number for whole Germany. And the IQ network has organized more than 2,000 different events and more than 700 training courses for labor agencies, enterprises, and so on. And these are together, again, more than 30,000 participants. So it's quite a number.
Yes, and if I may, I'm coming back to my initial remark that it's probably, for some countries with real dire labor market needs, these are short-term costs which they will happily shoulder to attract people, which brings me also to Kostas' earlier question about how do the migrants perceive different countries. I think that's part of the game that certain countries are playing to some extent, that they say, okay, we have to individualize services and we have to give a maximum, and hopefully that will also change the reputation that our country has. Did we have a welcoming culture, or do we have a culture of a recruitment stop? I mean, I think that these things have to be sort of seen very much linked, and that's also then one issue of sort of showing once again how important economic fundamentals are, including in the area of integration policy, unfortunately. Although one could argue that integration as such is a value and doesn't have to always be looked at in monetary terms of the short term. Yes, Kostas.
Yes, I would like to elaborate a little bit on this point that Susanna made. She said that the contribution to GDP of the low-skilled is equivalent to those of the high-skilled. I wonder if all the rights of migrants were respected, if this contribution to GDP would be equivalent, in the sense that most of these, not most of these jobs, but many of these jobs survive because they violate the rights. And there I should make a distinction between those that immorally, let's say, compete with others who are legally apply all the rules. But also, I cannot forget that there is an enormous issue. We are aging societies, for instance, just to take an example. And we know that the crisis left a lot of households with very limited income. We know also that as the population is aging, they depend on social protection, which is cut every year. So how we are going to cover the care needs that we have if we insist on full rights for the migrants? And I make a devil advocacy here just to say that it's not only good to defend the rights, but also you have to see the overall benefit of the society and how we can find the right policies in order to reinforce this benefit of the society as a whole. And I would like if Susanna can elaborate on that to give us some insight. Thanks.
So, first I will maybe elaborate on data. The data, we don't have a breakdown per nationality of a migrant when, as regards to contribution to the growth, to the GDP. What we have, I mean, what the World Bank has is like the estimate that 70% of global least developed countries and like the countries of developing countries in a way. So as these countries are home countries to the low-skilled migrants, we can estimate that this is like 70% of remittances go there, meaning that even if we assume that the high-skilled migrants are probably remunerated higher, still the scale constitutes not equal, but significantly larger contribution to the GDP. And well, in terms of the generation gap and benefits of the society, like which society, if we engaged in the discourse whether the society can afford the rights, not even touching on like this social justice principle, but there is a question: which society? If we have the people who are already present, who are constituting host societies for years, for generations, or even months, but they already contribute to the growth, to the labor market, how we can differentiate, right? I know maybe this doesn't actually answer your challenge, but I don't see any other way to reply to this question as from the rights perspective rather than technical perspective.
Any other remarks or questions? Oh dear, then I am supposed to speak, right? Maybe then let me also pick up on this last point here. I do agree that our societies have to think about not bringing down standards for everyone. I think that is how I read your question a little bit, that we have to, on the one hand, decide together how we provide services and try to not have too much population shrinking, but at the same time make sure that our societies, European societies, rich societies, I think you were referring to those, are making sure that we are not engaging on a downward spiral in introducing certain migration programs which are in parallel to our rights systems that workers have fought for many hundred years. And I think that is, for instance, one of the big themes for our organization as such, that we will have to look globally on how to make it possible that we do not transform migration as an issue into something which is undercutting labor markets everywhere, sort of that in every single country you will have migrants coming in and undercutting labor markets or finding niches which will be dealt with outside of the labor legislation. That is how I basically, to some extent, understood your question. And on our issue here at hand, I think for me the main conclusion is that there is terribly much work to do still, and terribly much work to do in particular on this link also of if we are talking equal rights and integration in terms of not discriminating against people who have picked up their education in other countries in this issue of recognition. But that there is it's not only a question of positing that this should be the case, but it's very difficult to do in practice. And for me, the German example is a very good example to some extent. If you look here, we do have a system with this new act, this Recognition Act, where many actors play together to bring this about, on the one hand, and yet, depending on the kinds of skills you're coming with into that country, you will go through a very different recognition procedure. The Chamber of Crafts have a different recognition procedures than the Chambers of Industry and Commerce. You have to take that into account, and I think to some extent that's also correct, because the educational systems in those two areas are also different, and those immigrants have to be non-discriminated at that level too. By the way, there's already a discussion now whether some people who have studied or taken out their first education in Germany are now not disadvantaged vis-à-vis of new-coming people because they cannot sort of have parts of their education recognized. So I think we are up to a lot of unresolved question in that area, and luckily at some point we'll be able to meet again. And but I find we have already illustrated that there is definitely progress in this area that has been done, and that there are lots of innovative ideas out there from which we can learn, from which different European countries can also learn if they hear about it. And we hope that to some extent we've exposed some of these ideas here today. And now I think it's probably my role to open the buffet, is it? So, bon appétit.